to pick back up on Man's Search for Meaning, the book that I'm reading. And I did a video last week on a quote from the author that kind of ended with the line, "We know the best of us didn't return home." And it was centered around the idea that to survive in arguably the most extreme, horrific situation you can imagine, being in a concentration camp, you had to compromise certain things about yourself. The way the author worded it was, whether it be by brutal force, betrayal of friends, just kind of compromising your values all around the objective of to survive. And I talked about kind of my visceral reaction to that, my initial reaction to that a few days ago. As I've had time to think about it more, it's stuck with me. And there's still some things that come out of that statement for me. And I should say, the book as a whole is obviously a fascinating, amazing book. That's well known and documented. For me personally, the reason I'm finding it so insightful and valuable is that obviously the context, right? Hearing from somebody who lived in this situation that's hard to even imagine is real, but obviously is, to get a firsthand take of that is super valuable. It's super insightful, particularly given his background as a psychologist. He has a unique perspective, and it's not to say and I think he would acknowledge this as well, it's not to say everything he says is exactly true for everybody that was there, but it is a good perspective on it. And for me, who looks at things at a very first principle level, to understand and to have almost a use case, which sounds trivial, or it seems to trivialize it or make it seem superficial, but I don't intend that. To have a use case of how humans respond and how the mind works in such an extreme condition is a very interesting and valuable thing to see. So back to the quote, the idea that the best of them did not return home. The two additional things I think that come out for me on that. Firstly, specific to the author, how unbelievably humble, courageous, insightful to make a statement like that. And I find myself wondering if, God forbid, I was ever in a similar situation and I did what I had to do to survive, would I have that same courage, that same humility to make that type of statement and actually mean it? To be able to say that there were other people there that were better than me, to use his words, right, the best of us, that those people were the ones that really should be celebrated, I guess, and that's probably not the right word, but to give them that acknowledgement and to say about myself that I was not one of those people. It's not to say that I'm a bad person, but I did what I had to do to survive. Not like those people that were the best of us. Again, just for somebody who thinks so much about self-reflection and introspection and trying to question ourselves, and am I thinking of this right? So much of that comes down to humility and the courage to face these inconvenient truths. And for this person to face that himself and actually accept that, and then to put it into a book and send it around the world, I can't help but think, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have the humility and courage to even acknowledge that myself. I think I would much more likely want to take the obvious route, which is, hey, I survived a Nazi concentration camp. Like, there's credit for that, and there is, obviously. But his ability to embrace the nuance and say, in his words, there was another way, a better way to handle it, is unbelievably powerful and amazing to see. And in many ways, that model of humility we talk about. But then the second piece of it, at a more macro level, kind of building on what I spoke about last time, I can't help but think that question, that idea, that concept of what do you do, right? Do I stick to my morals? Do I stick to my values, even in this horrific situation, above even my well-being and perhaps even staying alive and surviving? Or do I do what I need to do? Do I take the functional, more utilitarian approach and say, hey, I just have to survive this. That's what it's about. That dilemma, that question, I can't help but think all of us are answering that question every single day. Not at that level, not with that immediate, consequence there if we make the wrong decision, or to the extent there is a wrong decision. Not nearly as severe of a situation, obviously. But when I think about my life and the decisions I make, the way our minds work, we're constantly running this cost-benefit analysis. The source code that kind of underwrites that needs an answer to that question. How do you want me to handle this situation? Do you do what's best for you just to survive? Because that's what it's really about at a root level. It's about surviving and making sure that you can flourish or thrive in life and whatever that is. Or is there another component here? Is that the root level, the first principles level, you stay true to the values that you believe in? That has to be the underpinning component of it. No matter what the circumstance, even in a concentration camp, you stick to those values. And you could think of all the simple things we do every day when you're doing your taxes, when you're deciding when should I get the vaccine, should I use this thing to jump the line, when you're driving on the road, and like there's so many instances, right, where we're thinking, well, I can't be late. I need to make sure I'm on time because I don't want to get fired. I don't want this bad thing to happen. So what am I willing to do to make sure I protect myself? I just can't get that thought out of my head that it gets to one of those kind of critical questions of life and how do you handle it? And you can kind of go from there and you can play off of it. Well, if there are certain values, who's to say what the right values are and who's to say? And I think that's the point. I think, at least my takeaway of it is, I don't think there's a clear answer. I don't think anybody could say with absolute supreme confidence or certainty, yes, you always save your own life or look out for yourself no matter what, or you always stick to your values no matter what. I don't think that's the way the world works. Much to my first point here, the nuance that he was able to embrace in speaking about his own experience and that there were people better than him, that same nuance applies here as well. It's not clean, it's not easy. But I think the best we should do, the best we can hope for, is to struggle with this question, is to grapple with this question. We shouldn't take it as simple. We should perhaps acknowledge the fact we may never get it right or know if we get it right. But the goal has to be to think about this, to strive to kind of struggle with this. And when you're making these big decisions, be very thoughtful and deliberate. Have clarity on, why am I making this decision? Is it about me and saving myself or doing better for myself? And maybe that's okay, right? Maybe. Or is it about some value that I hold that I feel like I have to stay true to? And maybe that's okay. Or maybe I'm being too dogmatic about that value and I need to question myself and step back because right? There's 100 different ways it can go. But I think my takeaway is do the work. Be thoughtful. Struggle with it. Make your head hurt. Embrace the nuance. It's uncomfortable. But that's the only way. That's the only way you can give yourself a chance to try and get to a better outcome.